Thank you for joining my session. Let me show you first the topics I have prepared for today. First, I'd like to introduce myself, our team and community, and our documentation side. Then in the information architecture section, I will talk about how we started, how we got to know our audience, how we figured out what content we need, and how we outlined a sitemap for our documentation side. I will then share how we created the layouts and navigation for the site, and how we created and iteratively updated the design based on our community's feedback. Then I will discuss how content production started, how we developed and adjusted our editorial workflow, and how we ensure continuous production of updates and of new content. In the implementation section, I will briefly talk about the technologies we used. And in the last section, I will tell you how we collaborate with our remote and distributed community. So let me introduce myself and our team. I'm a technical writer. I started out in the Drupal community, where I had the chance to get involved in the community and see how people from different parts of the world with different technical and language skills can together contribute to documentation projects. I'm a co-author of the Drupal 8 user guide, and it was an amazing experience to work with so many great writers and editors from all around the world and get involved in the editorial workflow developed for this use case. I'm specialized in developer documentation, and as the director of documentation at platformOS, I had the opportunity to establish all processes for our documentation from the very beginning, to manage all phases of the editorial workflow, create templates, write, edit, and review content, and continuously monitor, measure, and improve our documentation. Now, some information about our team and community. platformOS is a model-based application development platform, which is aimed at front-end developers and site builders. It provides for a flexible API-driven development approach while automating the whole DevOps infrastructure. platformOS has been a distributed, fully remote company from the start. We have team members all over the globe, for example, in the US, Australia, Poland, Hungary, Romania, and in other countries. Similarly, we have partners from all over the world too. Everyone is working remotely most of the time, except when we meet at our annual team conference. This distribution in space also comes with the fact that groups of people working together are in different time zones. So we had to develop processes and use tools that are a good fit for this arrangement. This is our documentation site. It provides onboarding, conceptual information, tutorials, examples, API references, use cases, and best practices to developers building their apps or sites on platformOS. Following the docs as code approach, it is built for iterations and collaboration. Our documentation is fully open source. You can find all the code and content in our GitHub repository. Last year, we received a great recognition for our work on the documentation side. We won the UK Technical Communication Award and were praised for many aspects of our documentation, including our workflow, how we collaborate with our users, the clarity and structure of our content, and the information architecture of our site. Let's start with what we did in the discovery phase that was led by our UX strategist. This work started about 2.5 years ago, but we had a working site after a couple of months, and then iteratively changed and improved it into the developer portal that we have today. And we keep improving just like before, although the priorities shifted from information architecture to content and then to design, and in the different phases as our site matures. All throughout the process of building our documentation site, we thought of design as the underlying principle, and the underlying structure, and how everything works together instead of only focusing on the visuals. We followed the content first and design thinking approaches, and are continuously revalidating and improving our workflow, content, design, and user experience. Design thinking refers to the cognitive, strategic, and practical processes by which design concepts are developed, and it has key steps: empathize, define, ideate, prototype, and test. At the start, we explored our audience, our documentation needs, existing and missing content. We did this with some user interviews and workshops. In design thinking terms, this was the empathize phase. Then we defined personas and our content inventory. This was the define phase. And then we shared our ideas for content and features through a card sorting exercise. This corresponds to ideate. Based on our findings, we created a sitemap and prioritized the content needs. Layouts, wireframes, and content production, or in design thinking terms, the prototype phase, started based on the results of our discovery phase. In the last phase, we tested our assumptions through user interviews. We started the empathize phase with getting to know our audience in remote UX workshops. They were live online sessions in which everyone participated at the same time. Depending on the type of workshop you are running, you will have different goals and different kinds of UX deliverables to produce. Here I mentioned two tools that can work with most of the workshop types, Mural and Figma. We use Mural a lot in the beginning, but by now we switched almost entirely to Figma because other parts of our processes are now handled in Figma too. The first output from our workshops was a detailed description of each persona. These were the types of users that would be interacting with our documentation site. We use these personas to see how well the proposed solutions meet their needs and to prioritize features based on how well they address the needs of one or more personas. As we kept working with our users, it turned out that some of our initial assumptions weren't totally right. For example, we focused way less on the beginner developer persona in the beginning than we needed to. But that was not really a problem because we could fine-tune our personas and fine-tune our content when we got the feedback that we need more content for beginners. Taking into account our personas needs and some sites that we considered as our inspiration, we created a detailed list of content from our previous documentation site and identified missing, reusable, and non-reusable content for our future site. For the persona validation, sorry, I don't know what happened. So for the persona validation, we introduced the personas in Mural. Then we asked the participants to share their thoughts on them. They decided if they agree or disagree with the statements related to the personas' behaviors or goals. It was also possible to add missing items to the list. Validation was finished when all of us agreed on the personas. Then, through a card sorting exercise, we defined connected elements and mapped out the best site structure for our goals and proto-personas. Based on the content inventory and the results of our card sorting sessions, we outlined a sitemap for our future site. Our sitemap showed the structure of the site, and we could also use it as a kind of roadmap to keep track of site improvements, because we created a sitemap for each phase of our documentation site, like for alpha, beta, and so on. Since then, this sitemap has changed a lot as we re-evaluated the structure of our site based on user feedback. We use remote usability testing to validate our ideas with moderated and unmoderated tests. For moderated usability testing, we use Lookback.io with features like watching recordings at a faster rate, adding timestamped comments, and creating and sharing highlights from the recordings. For unmoderated usability testing, we use Playbook UX, which provides the tools to conduct moderated and unmoderated tests, and they provide a transcript of the sessions and some analytics. Related to specialized usability tasks, we usually use Usability Hub and Optimal Workshop. Usability Hub specializes in quick, unmoderated tests. This can include first-click tests, preference tests, 5-second tests, and so on. You can choose to recruit from either your own panel or from Usability Hub's panel. Optimal Workshop can help you design tree tests, card sorts, first-click tests, and some other tasks. They can also help you recruit participants for your studies. For surveys, we usually use SurveyMonkey. Their free product allows you to create surveys and send them out to anyone you want, but their upgraded features allow you to recruit from their audience. You can easily create surveys, quizzes, polls for your audience. It analyzes your results, and you can export your results or integrate your data with your favorite apps. Hotjar is a great tool to gather specific analytics. Recordings can help you to understand how users behave on your site, where users are going first, where they are facing issues. Heat maps can show the favorite functionalities and also the cold areas that users can't find or can't use. Funnels can help you understand where users are dropping. Feedback can help you gather more data about specific topics. Now let's see how content production started, how we developed our editorial workflow, and how we ensured continuous production of updates and new content. Besides the design thinking method, we chose to follow the content-first approach. After we had an idea of what our target audience needed, we wanted to explore what types of content we'll create for them and think about how we will display the content only after that. As you can see, our approach was to focus on the foundations first: content, user experience, and workflow. So to develop our content, we also developed an editorial workflow that works for all participants. For our documentation site, we follow the docs as code approach, as I have mentioned. We treat our docs like code, and our editorial workflow for content is very similar to our workflow for code. All of our code and content is on GitHub, and for transparency and to have the same process for all participants, we do all project management tasks on GitHub's issue queue as well. When we get internal or external feedback through Slack, the feedback block on our documentation topics, through user research, from team members, from engineering, and so on, all of these requests are considered tasks, and we don't really care for where they came from. They are tasks, whether they came from our team or from our partners. Once we have a task, we create a ticket, and once the ticket is ready, it goes into the backlog of our internal sprint planning, where we discuss priorities, and the selected tickets are added for the next sprint. Then the author writes new content or makes changes to existing content. The author can be any of our team members, but also any community member. The process is the same for everyone. When content is done, the author sends a pull request to the documentation GitHub repository, and then a developer and a writer review the PR. They suggest and discuss changes, and once it's final, we approve and merge it. We work with continuous integration and deployment, so once a PR has been merged, the new code or content goes through automated testing and is deployed to our staging site and then to our production site. The whole process, from ticket creation to merging the PR, is fully transparent, and anyone can see and contribute to it at any step on GitHub. Engaging our users early on in an agile and iterative process ensure that we can test and validate all of our assumptions and quickly modify anything if needed. Constant collaboration also builds trust. As our process is completely transparent, our community continuously sees what we are working on, how our docs evolve, and community members can be sure that their opinions are heard and acted upon. Involving the community from an early stage also means that our users saw lots of stuff that was half done or partially done, missing, or ended up totally rewritten. So for all of this to work, our users had to be mature enough to be able to see and comment on half-done content. Before we started producing content, we worked on our style guide and some templates. Our style guide contains guidelines for writing technical content like language, tone, and so on, and each content type in our documentation like tutorials, concept topic, references, and others. Our site uses liquid pages, but to make editing easier for all contributors, we write documentation content in Markdown and use a Markdown converter to turn it into liquid. Our templates include all non-changeable content and some placeholders with explanations for the parts that you have to add. Placeholders provide information on the format, like for example the title, any requirements or limitations, like the maximum number of characters, and so on. Anyone can contribute to our style guide too, or to the templates, and we have contributors with different levels of technical knowledge. Most of them are developers, but also account managers, QA, support, writers, and so on. Now let's see how we created the layouts and the navigation for the site, and how we created and updated the design based on feedback from different sources. Once we finalized the templates and produced some initial content, we had everything we needed to start thinking about the layouts of the different pages. Finalizing for us always means that it's final for now and can be and should be tweaked later. We used what we've learned about our personas from the first phase and collected patterns to identify how to best serve our audience. That helped us create the first wireframes that we iterated based on team and community feedback. We created wireframes for each layout in Balsamiq and collaborated on them in Marvel app. By now, we create wireframes in Figma too. Actually, we now use Figma for every part of UX design and the collaboration process, not just for creating wireframes and designs, but we also present and share our work to other team members or partners. We can hand it over to developers, export assets, provide feedback. It has versioning. We create the prototypes here too. So Figma now covers all that we need in our workflow now. As you can see from the process so far, we put our focus on audience, content, and UX first, and design only came later. In the beginning, the branding of platformOS was still in the making, so we couldn't even create branded visual design for the site. And this means, though, that by the time our branding was done, we had a working documentation site that was tested with real users and continuously improved based on their feedback. We believe that this way we could focus on the fundamentals and have a solid foundation that the design could then enhance. Here's an overview of how the visuals of the homepage have changed over the last couple of years. We have continuously updated the layouts, navigation, and content, and had a visual design update roughly each year. The first design was very minimal and functional. We created this based on our initial UX research that I talked to you about, and by going through the design thinking process. Then we had a year of iterations and fine-tuning with this minimal design, and then changed to the second design. At this point, the platformOS branding was prepared, but we haven't tested it or applied it to the web yet. This was the first design that followed our branding. While we were happily using the second design, we started fine-tuning our branding and creating design systems for platformOS sites. We also had a full design update on our marketing side, and during all of this, we got an understanding of how we would like to use our branding online. We kept the clean look and feel that is helpful for a documentation site, but added the elements from our branding to enhance the platformOS feel. I will now talk a little bit about how we implemented the site. I guess it's not a surprise that our documentation site is built on platformOS. It has a staging instance for development and testing, and a production instance, which is the live site. It works with continuous integration and continuous deployment. It automatically runs tests, deploys to staging, and then to production. Once it's done, it sends us a Slack notification. To support the small footprint deployment process, we use Node.js. For testing, we use the Test Cafe framework. Our code base is on GitHub. Besides standard web technologies like HTML, CSS, JavaScript, including JSON and AJAX, we use a couple of languages like YAML, Liquid, and GraphQL in our code. Good performance can help keep visitors on our site, provide the best user experience, and rank high in search results. So we always advocate for the best possible website performance that you can have. We use tools like Lighthouse and PageSpeed Insights for measuring performance. We also care about accessibility and make sure to test for and follow all accessibility best practices. You can see the Lighthouse scores of our documentation site on this screenshot. If you're more interested in how we have achieved these scores, then please check out our blog or our Dev2 page or the best practices section in our documentation, because we have detailed descriptions of the steps that we did to achieve these scores. Now let's talk a bit about the platformOS community. We serve a diverse community with highly motivated and active community members. And we wanted to provide everything to encourage and help them contribute to our documentation. To find the most fitting tools and workflow, we thought about contributor experience first. And we considered some factors that make their experience better. So these are some factors that we have addressed. The ease of getting on board. We describe ways for our community members to get involved in our contributor guide. The contributor guide is as short as possible, less than a page. And we added links to relevant content like the style guide or templates. The entry points for different types of contributors. We wanted to make it very easy to get involved for all segments of our target audience. So we offer different ways for contribution, both regarding the time that contributors have to put in and the skills they need. For quick feedback, we added a feedback block at the bottom of each documentation page, where the minimum input is clicking on a smiley, but users can also add some comments or a question if they want to. For some quick editing, like fixing typos or adding some links, they can use the GitHub UI. And for heavy editing, like adding new content or changing a larger section, we provide the Docs as Code approach through GitHub. To make contribution easier and to keep content on our documentation site consistent, we created the style guide and the templates. We developed this editorial workflow that works for internal, external participants, for all segments of our target audience. And we chose a tool in GitHub that was already familiar to most of our target audience, the developers who already use some kind of versioning system or Git. We also thank all of our contributors and display them on our GitHub repositories README page and on our contributors page. We are planning to make this experience even more rewarding with our upcoming community site. For the situation I described in the beginning, so being scattered all over the globe and in different time zones, we found that asynchronous communication is the way to go, or more precisely, asynchronous most of the time and real time when it's required. Solving the issue of being in different time zones is actually not the only benefit of having asynchronous communication. In fact, there are many more that far outweigh this benefit. For example, this approach reduces the number of meetings, especially compared to someone who is working in an office. This way, the communication also requires a bit more preparation. So we always prepare some draft or suggestion before we start the discussion. And even if you are communicating on Slack, you have to write and present your ideas clearly and precisely. Similarly to how we communicate among team members, we use asynchronous and real-time communication tools to communicate with our community. We even stretch real-time communication tools like video conference to become somewhat asynchronous by creating recordings and providing the opportunity to later comment on them. One of our main communication channels within our team and with our community is dedicated Slack channels. Besides that, we offer different ways to contribute to our documentation. And they can also participate in the bi-weekly town halls. These are video conferences where our team or our partners share topics that they think could be helpful to the community. We also run UX research sessions that they can join. And we offer several ways to stay in the loop through weekly status reports, release notes, roadmap, and articles on our blog. Finally, here is a summary of the tools that I mentioned in the presentation, paired with the task that we use them for. I hope this presentation gave you some insights into our workflow and the tools that you can use in your own remote documentation project. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Diana. That was great. So we've got a little bit of time for Q&A with you. So if anyone wants to ask any questions, please stick those in the Slack. But for now, we have 2 questions for you already from Eric, who is really being the Q&A MVP today. So the first question that we have is Eric says that your authoring process that you described is really impressive and thoughtful and complete, but he also imagines it's slower than more naive approaches. Was there any pressure from stakeholders to move more quickly? And if so, how do you convince them that it is worth spending all of the time up front?
Well, actually, it's not slower in the sense that we can show something very quickly, right in the beginning, and then we change that iteratively. So for stakeholders, I think this is quite reassuring because they don't have to wait for us to do something in the background and show them after a while, but they can see the whole process and they can see
Interesting.
The first version of our documentation site was done in a couple of months. So these 2.5 years that I mentioned is from the beginning until now, but the first version they could already see and comment on in a couple of months.
Wonderful. Okay, cool. That's really interesting. Yeah, I guess having that whole process open is beneficial for everyone as well as the community. So Eric's next question was just pure and simple. How significant was the community contribution to developing the documentation? He adds a little bit, which is his team have been weighing opening up the documentation to external contributions, but there is doubt about whether the scale of the effort required is going to be returned in terms of like how many people contribute and what kind of contributions they get.
Yeah, well, we allowed contribution everywhere, so not only to content, but we welcomed any feedback, or not even welcomed, but we encouraged by having user research sessions and interviews with users, because in the beginning, of course, there were only a couple of people who were very vocal about their opinion. But then as time went on, if someone told us some feedback like, hey, here's a typo, we could encourage them to, okay, go to GitHub and edit it. And then you'll show up among the contributors. So the whole process required some encouragement, but now works more smoothly.
Cool. Yeah, I saw you were using all contributors on your repo, so everyone gets a nice bubble after they've, it's really nice. Awesome. Cool. It doesn't look like we have any other questions. So once again, thank you, Diana. That was wonderful.